Scheduling projects. We've got 5 short lectures to work through. This is chapter 7 of your textbook and lecture 5 from the lecture series. The first lecture, or short lecture, is on scheduling processes, of which there are 7, and the purpose of scheduling. 3 outcomes that we're looking at. Firstly, you should be able to describe the project schedule limitations, which we'll take you through this lecture. Identify 7 schedule processes, 6 of them belonging in the planning component, and 8 in the planning process group, and 1 is in the monitoring and controlling. And the main thing we'd like you to get out of this lecture, and also your labs, is that scheduling is a model. It's a model of what's possible. That model is going to be then affected by constraints. Reality. Reality kicks in. We need the model first to see how best to cope with additional pressures or constraints on schedules. Too often people just start with the constraints and then come up with unrealistic schedules to meet those constraints. So building a schedule, the main component, just like the main component of a work breakdown structure was a work package, the main component of a schedule is the activity. Activities and work breakdown and work packages don't have to be one-to-one. It may be a good idea at this early stage of your project management career that you do make a work package equal an activity. So an activity is something that needs to be done. It has a clear start and end. After that activity has been completed, something has happened. The one that we'll do in class is concrete setting. Okay, just waiting for the concrete to set. That's an activity. But the outcome is that we have our uprights in the ground and they're set in concrete. We may need to assign material, labour. It has associated costs and things that we need to do to control the schedule. Much like work packages, the main rule is that there's only one person responsible or accountable for a single activity. You can't have an activity in a schedule that relies on the authority of 2 parties, because otherwise it's the activity that doesn't get done. And finally, we use those activities because they're part of the scope, and they so the work breakdown structure dictates what activities do get done and what doesn't get done. So an activity, the format is build fence, prepare budget, so verb, noun. I think Trevor would have taken you through this in the labs, and or it could be write final report, build wooden fence, something with an adjective. This is the main part from this lecture, and we'll carry this through, the 5 subcomponents of lectures. There are 7 processes. Traditionally there used to be 6, but since PMBOK 2014, every knowledge area, which is defined by, one of the main things about knowledge areas are what processes are undertaken for that knowledge area. This is time management knowledge area. Every knowledge management area has also been given a process, which is plan, in this case schedule management. You'll notice in scope we had something called plan scope management. Okay, that's just indicating that to undertake all the processes 2 to 7 in this case, you've got to think about how you're going to do that. Alright, so traditionally we put in processes 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Let's go back to that slide. These here, an outcome of those is what goes into project management plan. So they all belong to planning. This one here is a planning process, but it's the discussions and the agreement on how to undertake those 6 planning processes, and finally the 1 monitoring and controlling. Okay, so really what we're trying to get out of this, there are 7, sorry, I get used to old days. There are 7 planning processes. The first one is deciding how you go about planning schedule. From 2 to 6, your traditional processes for making or developing a schedule, which is your planned schedule. We're talking about it as a baseline. And finally, what occurs during the execution of the project that means that we have to keep control of the schedule. This week's lecture is mainly about these 5 processes here. So the purpose of the project, well, we really, project helps us answer questions. Project schedule, helps us answer questions. One of the main questions is, when will the project finish? When does the project complete? But it can also help us answer other questions. Is what is the earliest time and a particular activity can start? When will that activity end? And it also tells us things about what sequence. Before we can dig this hole, what needs to be done? Okay, before we put on the ceiling, we must have the ground and the walls, and then we can have the ceiling. Then we can have the roof. So it gives us a sequence of things. So mainly, a schedule tells us when we believe the project will be completed. It tells us at what time each activity can be done. And it also gives us an idea of what sequences are involved. Once we have a model of the schedule, we can start answering some what-if questions, and things like, if material is late, what effect does delaying one activity in the project have on all the subsequent activities? All the things that haven't been done depend on things that have been done. If one of those activities is delayed, what impact does that have on the rest of the project? So your project schedule needs to be flexible enough to answer what-if questions, and flexible enough to track the project and make changes in real time. So what if a key worker takes a vacation? What if we overload a resource? If one worker is assigned to do 2 activities, which activity should we do first? How many hours do we need? What sort of resources do we need? So schedule and resources do actually work hand in hand. Scope, schedule, resources, which produces the project cost. So really we're talking about scope, cost, time here. Scope, cost, time always. Resources matter for both schedule and cost. What impacts does the schedule have on the end date and on resources? So for example, a schedule can help us look at if one of the resources is actually creating a bottleneck or slowing down the speed of the project. Do we need to assign extra resources to those particular activities? What impact will happen if we change scope? So if we need to fit another part of scope in, or an extra module, how does that affect the overall delivery time? So our schedule should be able to answer that question. Can we crash a project? By crashing a project means that we throw extra money at a particular set of activities by adding additional resources or technologies, or finding an expert in that. So what we look at for crashing is the basic rule of crashing is, where do we put our money to shorten the schedule? Okay, and we'll talk about that throughout the labs, is the main thing. And the other thing about schedule, it should be used to help track and replan the project. Track and replan. So your schedule needs to have a characteristic which we call closed. The schedule needs to be closed. There can only be one beginning and one ending. If it's not closed, then you can't effectively track the project, which is here. It's difficult to make decisions about what to crash. Okay, it's hard to see what impact of adding an extra resource might have, or relaxing that bottleneck. So getting a closed project is essential. So in the labs, we're basically doing this, what we call, well, actually, to be honest with you, we're actually doing both parts, but we're looking at an initial pass, that is identifying all activities, determining the order in which they occur, so sequencing the project, assigning the resources and estimating the duration. So that gives us a sort of initial pass. This is what possibly the project could look like. But then we have to deal with certain imposed or external constraints. The sponsor might want it finished by December the 11th. So how do we change what we have, which is this initial pass? How do we change it to meet this constraint? Okay, so what do we need to do to our model to help us meet externally considered constraints? Also, what impact does this initial model have on our cash flow? Can we pay for it? Okay, and where are the risks? So actually optimizing schedules is an art as well as a science. And what we're learning in this unit is how to do this part. Okay, and we're making some acknowledgement that these things exist and that we need to cope with them. All right. This last one here, optimizing a schedule to improve things like cash flow or risks or quality, to meet stakeholder expectations, to finish as quickly as possible. That becomes a bit more scientific. Years ago, we used to use linear program to solve that problem. But I think we'll do enough in this unit to create a good schedule. So really, the next sequence of short lectures is going to be explaining some of these things, and in particular these 5 here. Alright, finished.